You've been scrolling through a dozen car lift listings, trying to picture the one that will actually sit in your garage without turning the whole space into a construction zone, and that won't leave you worrying every time you drop a chassis onto its arms. You want something reliable, easy to live with, and worth the money, not just a long list of numbers that sounds impressive on paper. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. Let's talk about why the Bendpak XPR 12CL 12,000 pounds. Clearfloor 2-post lift might be the sensible middle ground, and when it's probably not the right fit. First off, the biggest hesitation most buyers have is the fear of buying a lift that either can't handle the weight they need or that takes forever to install and then eats up all the room they have left for tools and tires. I've watched a few garage renovation videos where a 2-post lift ended up hogging half the floor because the Clearfloor design turned out to be more of a marketing term than a real space saver. With the XPR 12CL, the Clearfloor concept really does mean the lift's uprights are positioned farther apart, giving you a wider work area under the arms. In practice, that translates to being able to wheel a typical full-size sedan or a small truck onto the lift without having to shuffle it around or remove the front wheels first. If you've ever tried to line up a vehicle under a lift that's too narrow, you know how much extra stress that adds to the whole process. Who should consider this lift? If you run a small to medium shop that regularly handles cars up to about 6,000 pounds, SUVs and light trucks that tip the scale at 8,000 pounds, or you're a serious hobbyist who wants to work on a project car that pushes the 10,000 pounds mark, the 12,000 pounds capacity gives you a comfortable safety margin. The rating on Amazon sits at 4.7 out of 5 stars from 15 reviewers, which, while a modest sample, suggests that owners who've actually installed it are generally happy. Those reviewers mention that once the lift is up and running, the hydraulic system feels smooth and the arms stay level even when you're doing a full suspension drop. For a shop that needs to get a vehicle off the ground quickly and keep it there without constant adjustments, that reliability matters more than a headline-grabbing 20,000 pounds rating you'd find on a larger, industrial-grade lift you could never fit into a residential garage. On the flip side, if you're a weekend warrior who only ever does oil changes, brake work, or short-term lifts for tire rotations, you'll probably be overpaying for the capacity and the structural robustness of this unit. The XPR 12CL isn't a cheap piece of equipment. You're looking at a price point that makes sense when you factor in the time saved not having to use jack stands for each job, and the safety net of a lockout system that prevents accidental lowering. But for someone who lifts a car once a month, a simpler floor jack with a sturdy stand could serve just as well without the permanent ceiling-mounted hardware. Installation is another practical area where the XPR 12CL stands out, and also where it can trip up the unwary. The lift requires a solid concrete pad, a 3-phase power source, and enough ceiling clearance to accommodate the fully raised height of a typical sedan about 70 inches from the floor. In a garage with a sloped ceiling or low beams, you'll need to either reconfigure the space or accept a lower maximum height, which could limit how deep you can drop a suspension. I've seen a few DIY installs where the owner had to cut back drywall and rear out lighting just to make the lift fit without hitting the ceiling. That's not a hidden cost you want to ignore if you're budgeting for the lift alone. Once it's installed, the daily usability feels pretty straightforward. The lift uses a single-pump hydraulic system that you control with a pendant switch. You raise the car, lock the arms, and the lift holds the weight without any noticeable drift, which is a real confidence booster when you're working underneath a vehicle for an hour or more. The Clearfloor design also means your wheels stay in the same line you drove them in, so you don't have to fight against the lift's arms pulling the tires inward, a subtle annoyance that can turn a simple brake job into a balancing act. Now let's talk about practical weaknesses. Because the lift is a 2-post design, the front and rear of the vehicle are supported only at the wheels, so any chassis damage or weakened suspension components could make the lift less stable. That's why it's essential to inspect the car's undercarriage before you lift, especially if you're working on older, rust-prone models. Additionally, the hydraulic pump, while smooth, can be a bit noisy when you're in a small garage with the doors closed, something to consider if you're sharing the space with a home office or a living area. The pump,